Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice. Morning, Keith.
Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
I'm excellent. I am incredibly grateful, actually, to have my colleague Keith Eastland here today. For our watchers and listeners that don't know Keith, although that's kind of hard to believe, Keith, that they don't.
It's possible.
That they don't know you already. One of the things, though, that Keith, you really spend a lot of time talking to clients about and helping clients with has to do with union organizing and employee engagement, right?
Yep, absolutely. I love traditional labor law, and we do a lot of that.
And I'm glad you do, because I don't do any of it. So thank you, first of all. I really appreciate it. And so whenever I have a question involving protected and concerted activity or union organizing, I call up Keith, and he always knows the answer right off the top of his head, which is fantastic. But we really wanted Keith to come on today because, Keith, I am aware enough in this world to understand that we are seeing both an increase in union organizing, and to me, it appears a really different kind of organizing than we have in the past. Is that right?
Absolutely. Both in terms of numbers and in terms of the kind or type of union organizing that we're seeing, and in particular, sort of the grassroots kind of movement, right? So what we've all seen, right? We see on the news, Starbucks, around the country getting organizing drives, election petitions, Amazon, Apple stores, those sorts of things. And in fact, the data just came out for the first half of fiscal year 22, which is October through this past March, so 6 months. Union organizing petitions with the National Labor Relations Board are up 57%.
Wow.
So just from a number.
Just from the beginning of this year to now, really.
Right, 6 months.
Wow.
57% increase.
Okay.
So much so that the general counsel for the NLRB has issued a statement saying how taxed they are and how they need more funding. So
yeah, and I would imagine you're also taxed.
A little bit at times, but yeah.
Helping businesses manage that.
Yeah, so the numbers are up.
The numbers are up. Talk to me about the grassroots piece,
Sure.
Keith, right? So my experience, limited experience with union organizing, of course, was with large unions, the UAW, the UFCW, et cetera. That's not really what's happening now, right?
Right. What we're seeing is, I referred to it as grassroots, but you remember, you can form a union with your coworkers.
Yeah.
You don't need the UAW. You don't need the Teamsters, right? Now they provide some resources and some experience. But what we've seen, at least in my career, is some of the newer folks to the workforce, maybe some of the millennial generation, sort of individualistic folks, right? Maybe they don't have their head turned to hear what the traditional, union folks have to say. But they really like the idea of, hey, Sarah, Jeff, Keith, we're all in this together. We can form our own union. And that's what the Amazon in particular, right? There's an excellent podcast that we can send a link to someone if you want to listen to it. But
okay.
You may recall in Staten Island, one of the distribution centers at Amazon. Back in COVID, they went on strike. It was all over the news, early COVID days. Anyway, they ended up firing a supervisor because he had raised COVID concerns.
Okay. So he was originally a supervisor.
Correct.
Okay.
And then he decided, okay, you fired me. I was raising legitimate concerns on behalf of the workers at this facility. I'm going to talk to the workers, and I'm going to engage them, and we're going to form our own union. So he spent months kind of at the bus stops.
You're kidding.
No, it's a great podcast. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you should listen to it.
Gathering support.
Yeah. Gathering support, talking to them about, what's going on with their lives, what do they like at work, what do they don't like at work. There weren't a lot of huge complaints. It was like, hey, I'd like a little bit longer break, those sorts of things. And he gained their support, their hearts and minds, right?
He
gained their
listened to them.
confidence. Yes.
He listened to what they had to say,
Yeah.
and they okay.
Yeah, he cared about them.
And
right?
so what happened next?
And so about 6 months later, bang, union petition for this union that's not affiliated with,
Any union.
any.
It's this guy's own union, right?
Right.
That he created.
Yep, Amazon Workers Union.
And they won. And they
won in Staten Island,
unionized,
and now they're unionized. And now
which is a huge, big deal.
it is,
right?
It is, and well, of course, there's the Alabama case that is in the news where the Amazon prevailed on the election, but they're having a rerun because there was some problems with the mailbox outside the plant.
Okay.
But this gentleman and this union is now going all across the country. You Google it. There's links to it. So he's targeting any other Amazon facilities, right? We can help you form your union, right? Not, hey, we want the Teamsters. Hey, this is what the UAW can do for you. And so that's
It's a different model altogether.
Yes. It's really different. And so much so, I think I read in the Wall Street Journal last week, there's some articles about how some of the more traditional union supporters, right, organized labor, the people that value that think that's a very important part of our society, are worried about it
Yeah.
because they feel like these smaller unions may not have the financial support and the experience that's needed. So they're
really
trying to
do
get
it.
them to all unite. So it's going to be interesting seeing what happens, but it becomes a risk for any small pot of disgruntled folks that want to surf the internet or get on their smartphone and see,
Sure.
how do I join a union?
I mean, the takeaway really for me from that story is this guy at the bus stops, because he listened and engaged with employees, was able to accomplish what none of the larger unions have been able to accomplish for more than 10 years.
Correct.
They've all been trying to organize Amazon and have failed.
Right.
And haven't been able to do it, right? I haven't, only in one other case, I think, could they get a petition filed, right? And that was the Alabama case. And they haven't been able to get a petition filed.
And think about why, right?
Yeah.
Your employees are going to look at the message, right? It's a sales pitch in many ways. Like, what do you have to offer me? Well, that message that the traditional organizer would provide, not really compelling. But when you had someone that worked at your place of your facility, your place of business, understood what you go through,
Right.
understood what it's like to work a 9-10 hour shift,
Sure.
right? And they raise concerns on your behalf. You see them get fired, he comes back, and it's like he was a champion of their cause.
Of their cause.
personal
Rather than an
cause.
outside third
Exactly.
party, some national union, maybe with a local rep, but
Right.
otherwise disconnected from them. And we're going to talk more in a little bit about what that means for employers, because to me, that rethinks completely what I've understood as an employee engagement strategy to address potential union organizing, right? That makes you rethink your whole strategy, I think.
Well, yes and no, right? Yes, in the sense that the strategy of your opponent may be, right? If
Right.
you believe that you don't want to be a unionized workforce because you believe that you don't need an outside party to speak for your workers, that you're better off communicating and working with them directly, your employees, right? That foe traditionally has been, or the opponent has been, this larger union, and so the tactics and the communications that
Sure.
you might want to consider adopting would be targeted. Now you can't do that anymore. You really have to engage your own people.
That's
you
right.
Have to, you have to
That's right.
You got to look in the mirror, right? You got to say, what do we do really well? What do we need to improve on, right? What are the things causing our employees concerns? Are we doing something to fix them? If we can't, are we explaining why? So that part of it is there, right? The recipe for remaining union-free, so to speak, right, has always been that employee engagement.
Employee engagement.
So that it just highlights, right?
I think that's really well put.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So, I mean, union campaigns have often centered around, from the employer side, an argument that we can engage and listen to you better than this outside third party, right?
Yes, exactly.
Than this big
Well
UAW,
put.
Teamsters, et cetera. And so if that's not happening anymore, right? In other words, it's not a comparison. It is the spotlight instead is solely on the organization. I like how you said it. It really, really does highlight the importance
Right.
of employee engagement, right? Do you want the guy at the bus stop to feel like your employee, right? Do you want your employees to feel like the guy at the bus stop is listening to them better than the organization?
Correct.
Right?
Right. And so now we're talking about all of your leadership team, your managers, your frontline deck plate
Right.
supervisors, right? Right. They're critical. They're always critical, but even more so now, right? Because if they're turning folks off, right? If they're not doing the things to engage them, to make them feel part of the team, have a common mission, like what they do, enjoy coming to work, or at least certainly feel like they're supported in their needs.
It's everything.
It's everything. And if you get too far down the path, right, and you don't have an employee engagement strategy that you're executing on, periodically or
Right.
continually, you get a pocket or two of maybe it's a bad supervisor. You get 5 or 6, and then all of a sudden, you could be facing grassroots organizing.
Do you see employers developing sort of short and long-term employee engagement plans?
We do see some of that. We're encouraging. That's one of the
I
things.
mean, I think that's what HR folks should be
Yes.
thinking about, right? Putting together a plan and getting the organization behind it,
Right.
and saying this is what we have to do.
Right. And some of our
Every
clients,
year.
we've worked with sort of break the glass plans, right? Where you say, okay, if we get this is how we're going to do it. But also, this is sort of our strategy of how we maintain our union-free status is we don't want our employees to need the union, so we have this engagement strategy. You got to dust those things off, right? We had the pandemic, right? Where we didn't talk to employees, right? People got distanced.
Oh my goodness.
And so my whole advice to clients, or not my whole, but part of my advice is, look, you need to think about this. You need to think, what is your organization? Right? What goals do you have? What is the organization's position on this? How do we best achieve that? What are we doing now? Right? What are we doing now for this? And we need to dust that off, if you have that already, to think about, okay, this is a little different. It's a little different opponent.
Oh, for sure.
So,
And in my view, Keith, the timing on this is right now,
yes.
right? We have many businesses who have been remote. They have had a lot of employees who have been working remotely, right?
Sure.
We've been in the crisis of a global pandemic, right? And I do feel like we are at a place right now where employees are looking to be more engaged. They are looking to their employers and sort of asking, what are you going to do, right? What are you going to do to engage with me?
Right, to reconnect, to
Yeah, that's a good
solidify
way to
that
put it.
relationship. If you're a successful company, successful organization, you have those connections. But are they frayed? Or how do you solidify them? And there's legal reasons. Well, there's sort of environmental, I call them, reasons, and legal reasons that you want to do it now as well.
Okay,
Right?
talk about those. What's
Sure.
going on with that?
So environmentally, right? I might call it the perfect storm for organizing,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Politically, you have a president who stated on the record, most pro-union president you have ever seen. That's what President Biden said. We have statements from the federal government for the first time that I've seen in 15 years of practicing in private practice. The federal government's policy is to support union organizing. Not,
right.
hey, we're going to be neutral because you have the right to select or not select a union if you're an employee, because that's what the law says. But we're going to put our 800 pounds on the scale of we want you to select a union.
Okay.
That's an official government policy. So the political, and then economic, right? I mean, labor shortage, labor has, right, they've got some authority, some power. They've got leverage, right? You can't retain or attract new employees, right? If you can, call us, because I want to know how you're doing it.
Right, exactly. Well, and I'll just say to that, I'm seeing a lot of issues, and Rebecca and I talked about this in a previous podcast, but I think this ties into organizing as well. This idea that employers are paying new hires wages that sometimes are at or above what they're paying their people who have been
Right.
there for an extended period of time.
Right.
Talk about a union or organizing
Yeah.
issue, right?
Oh, yeah. That's throwing the match on the kindling, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right, and then also inflation, right? I mean, 8.5% I think is the most recent one, the number that I've seen out there in terms of the official inflation, depending on what measure you use. But Miller Johnson, we as labor lawyers, we represent unionized employers as well, and so we bargain contracts. Well, you can imagine what union contracts are getting. The 3% raise. No, that's 7, 8, 9% now in year one. So the unions are out there. They're getting collective bargaining agreements done, and so they're going to be able to use that to say,
Then
well,
they can
look,
trumpet that,
we're
right.
getting 9%, 10%, which is whatever, real increase of 1.5.
Sure.
And so one of the things I tell clients is, what's your inflation strategy? Do you have a wage
What are your
and
wage
benefits,
increases?
which ties into your point. Like, can we really bring Sarah in at $5 an hour more than Keith, who's been here a year?
My observation too is that I would just add on to that. I see a generation of people, the millennials, I think is what you call them, right, Keith? Those younger than us, who are perhaps have grown up in a time where it's very comfortable for them to speak, right? They've come up in a time of social media,
Yes.
and they are very comfortable speaking for themselves publicly, right? Saying things, particularly to create change.
Sure.
And I think that also adds an element to this. It explains the supervisor who was fired and then felt very comfortable going to bus stops and talking to people and doing this thing. That hasn't really been done before in that way, ever.
Right, and it and I think that goes to the comfort level that those types of individuals will have in forming their own union.
Right.
If they believe that makes sense for them, if they think that that's going to improve their working conditions, make things better, they're the voice of change. It's not somebody telling them these are the things you should ask for because that's what unions ask for. No, this is us. This is our. So as much as they don't like to be told what to do and maybe don't want to associate with groups, right? I mean, there's studies out there that say they don't join groups, right? The millennials don't join the Rotary Club or whatever, right? They like to do their own thing. But this is kind of a different
It is their own thing, really.
Exactly.
That's how they view it. For HR folks, then, to be thinking about this, right? What I've heard you say is giving their employees a voice, a meaningful voice, and listening to what they say is critical, right? Making them feel valued is critical. What else? Anything else?
Just, appreciated, valued, communication, huge, right? Why are we doing
Transparency.
things? Transparency, great word, right? That's a great word for it,
Right.
right? And if there's something that isn't great in the workplace, why? If there are issues, can we fix them? If we can't fix them, are we communicating to people why? I always like to say people will take, out the garbage and it'll smell. But if they understand why they need to do it, because it's helping, right, the bigger picture, and they're part of that, they're much more. But if it's, I got to take out the garbage because why? Because I'm told you so.
Right.
Because I said so, right? It's like, well, wait a second, right? And so what I've talked to clients about is, obviously the strategic, the HR personnel listeners here, can get out ahead of this with leadership, right? And talk about some of the new things that are coming down, the changes in the opponent, so to speak. And where do we want to land as an organization? What steps have we done? Maybe what steps should we be doing?
What do we need to be doing?
Right?
Sure.
Are you doing departmental, assessments, right? I always like to say to HR professionals, I know you all can think of the top 3 complaints in your workforce.
Right.
What are they? And what have you done?
And do they usually know off the top of their head? 1, 2, 3, right?
Oh yeah. It's usually, I can give you 10, right?
Right.
But what are the ones that are really stick in the employee's craw, right? I mean, what bothers people? And Have we tried to address it? Are you addressing it? Have you communicated about it?
That's right, because maybe you are, but people don't know it.
Bingo.
First of all, right? So they need to have a voice to tell you about it. The organization has to be willing and invested in doing something about it, and then you got to make sure that people know, right?
Exactly.
That's the sequence.
Yeah, and it goes back to your point about connecting. Are we connecting? Right?
Yeah.
Are our leaders and our supervisors and managers doing what we want them to do?
Yeah.
And obviously there's employee engagement surveys. There's a number of ways to be doing this, but pay attention to those efforts right now.
Yes, yeah, certainly. And of course, to your point, there's a number of different ways to do it, and different organizations are going to be using different tools.
Correct.
to apply those principles.
And Sarah, one of the things that we see often when we get involved with there's maybe union organizing or election petition is, some level of managers and supervisors who just don't know anything about it. And so the default is I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to say a word because I don't want to get in trouble. And so what ends up happening is instead of engaging employees in lawfully and persuasively consistent with your legal rights as an employer,
It's just silence.
it's
right?
silence
Yeah,
and
right.
it snowballs.
Yeah. Yep, of course. Yeah. So that training is just,
It's important.
it's got to be part of the plan.
Right.
If I were in HR right now, right, I think I would be looking to put together a plan, an employee engagement plan, particularly if union avoidance is really important to the organization I work with. I'd be going to my bosses, to the executives, and getting their support for it.
Right.
And I think that plan is both short-term and long-term.
Right, and there's lots of things that you can do. The law doesn't allow you to create what we would call a company union, right? You can't get a group of people together and say, well, we're going to bargain with you so that we don't have the union. Right? That's unlawful. But there are committees and things that, if they're structured correctly, can be very valuable.
Different options
and on the
to
bright side of the law,
right.
and make people feel like they
Right.
have that voice.
Right, right. Now, I've heard about some new general counsel memos and initiatives and
Correct.
things like that. If you don't mind, could you just give us an update and tell us what's going on with that?
Yeah, right. So the good news is on the legislative front, the PRO Act, which I'm sure everyone has heard about. If you haven't, you've been probably
Well, of course.
under a rock. That's stalled, and we don't think much is going to come out of Congress to change federal labor law, at least until they see what happens
Right.
in the midterms. So that's a good news. The less good news for employers, I think, is less good news, is that we have a very aggressive National Labor Relations Board General Counsel. Right? And the General Counsel, if your listeners don't know, they decide which cases to bring to the National Labor Relations Board,
Right.
because they don't pass traditional rules like the Department of Labor or the FDA, or they decide rules by decision, right? They create rules by
It's
decision.
so interesting. They pick the cases they want to take and then make the rules by deciding those cases.
Correct. It's kind of like a common law system for lawyers, if but yes, so it's like a prosecutor, right? The top cop of the NLRB, a woman by the name of Jennifer Abruzzo, she decides what policy is, and then if they believe there's a violation, they charge it.
Pick the cases.
They issue
Got
a
it.
complaint, and then they litigate that, and then the NLRB, a few months later, will decide if they adopt the rule for everyone across the country. Subject, of course, to
This
court.
is why I can't be a labor lawyer, by the way. It changes with the wind.
Yeah,
right?
it's one of the frustrating things about being a traditional labor lawyer is the pendulum shifts.
The pendulum and the rules change all the time.
They do.
Yes, right?
They do. So what some of the I'll just go through them quickly, but I'd say 4 or 5 key issues that the General Counsel is looking to change that I think your listeners would care about. The first is restrictions on free speech rights of employers.
Okay.
For 74 plus years, the employer has been able to call a meeting, mandatory meeting of their employees and speak with them about lawfully, right? You can't coerce, you can't threaten, but you can say, hey, we don't think
We're
a
going to
union
have a
makes sense.
meeting and we can talk to you about.
Right. We're going to have a meeting at the large conference room on 11th floor at Miller Johnson. We're going to talk about why we think sure, you have the right to unionize. We don't think it makes sense.
Okay.
It's free speech right. It's in the statute, First Amendment concerns. As long as you didn't coerce or threaten during that speech, fine, you could make people go. Same thing if I saw you working on a floor in the hospital and I wanted to talk to you about something that might implicate union rights or your statutory rights. I could just pull you off to the side, and as long as I did it lawfully and didn't interrogate you about what you thought.
Or threaten me. Or,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's guardrails that exist already. That's fine. It's been fine. In the Supreme Court and the NLRB has said it's good. We want employees to make an informed choice. Now, the General Counsel recently, in the last month or so, has asked the NLRB to say, no. You can't have what we call captive audience speeches. You can't make your employees come to a meeting and listen to talk or discussion, even lawful discussion about their union rights, because it's inherently coercive. And
just talking about it is coercive.
Yes, that's the theory.
So much for transparency.
Right. And if you're familiar with, criminal law and the Miranda rights, right? When you right to remain silent,
Sure.
all that good stuff.
That's about that's about as far as I can get to.
That's right. You have a right to an attorney.
Something like that.
So now, if you want to talk to your employee, if you want to have a captive audience meeting or a mandatory meeting, or I just want to pull you off the line, if the NLRB General Counsel says you have to give sort of Miranda-type warnings. You have to tell Sarah, hey, I'm having this conversation with you, here's why. It might involve your union rights. You need to know that you can leave at any time. And it's voluntary. And basically requiring you to get consent. Now think of how stilted that is.
Right, that's bizarre. Yeah.
And so that's up on a...
I think most employers probably are not going to have the meeting, is what I'm thinking.
Right. Now, I guess the good news right now is the NLRB has not asked to apply that rule looking backward. The General Counsel has asked the board to apply it going forward, at least for now. So there may be a window of opportunity there you can still have those meetings. But if you wanted to have a meeting, you would have to basically say, look, meeting, this is why we're doing it, and basically have evidence of the fact that you
gave them the right and told them they could leave if they wanted to,
and
they
they
didn't
won't
really
be penalized
have to be there,
in any
and
way
they have all
because
these
of
rights.
it. Yes.
Blah blah blah.
And what we find in organizing campaigns, right, is the people that will go are either the people that strongly support the company and the employer, because everyone knows, or those that strongly support the union.
Right.
Well, who doesn't go? The
ones in the
fence-sitters.
middle, the ones that
Because
actually
they don't want to get in the crossfire of their coworkers. They
Right.
just want to come in and do their job. So if it's not mandatory, they're not going. Because if they go and it's voluntary, that's going to look like they're supporting the employer, and they're going to have to
hear from their
coworkers.
coworkers. Right. So in that case, the employer could still provide written communication to employees
Correct.
without the warning.
Correct.
Which, of course, is not nearly as effective as having a conversation
Exactly.
with employees. Of course, is not nearly as effective. But
Exactly. Yeah, the other real large one, from my perspective, is a change on when the law can impose a union on an employer. So the rule right now is if your workforce, let's say you had 100 people in your plant, widget factory. If 51 of those employees signed cards, so a majority of them signed cards that they wanted the UAW to represent them, to be their bargaining representative, the employer could say, we want an election. Okay, that's your right.
which is usually how it goes.
Secret ballot
Yeah.
election, exactly. So right now, they can only deny the employer's right to that election if they can prove that there's majority support of signing cards and the employer engaged in egregious unfair labor practices.
Okay.
Right? So they do things like, if you guys vote for the union, we're going to shut this thing down.
Right.
We're shutting
or
it down.
fire you all,
Right.
or reduce your wages,
Exactly.
or whatever it is.
Right. And so the rationale is, well, you've poisoned the well so badly.
Right.
That
the
you can't have
election is meaninless
You got
because
it.
you can't have free choice. You're too afraid.
Right.
Okay.
There's something that the General Counsel wants to go back to. It's a 1949 doctrine called Joyce-Silk is the name of the case. But
Okay.
they want to change when they can impose that on you. So if the union comes and they have 51 cards and they say, Sarah, please recognize us. We have 51 people. It's a majority. Just accept the UAW. Let's bargain a contract. And you say, no, I want an election. Now you must have a good faith doubt that those 51 signatures aren't accurate. And if you insist on an election and you violate the law pretty much in any way, the NLRB can then impose the union on you. So if you violate...
So it's a different standard.
Exactly.
And
Any
to
violations.
be clear for our listeners, those signatures of the 51 out of 100 employees, right? So there's 49 who haven't signed, which I think is important to bear in mind, right?
Absolutely.
Those have all been collected often before the employer knows about it.
Absolutely.
And has any knowledge of what information prompted those employees to sign it. It could be based on misinformation that needs to be corrected, for example, right? Misassumptions, et cetera. So those were all collected usually before the employer knows anything is going on and has any opportunity to respond, answer questions, et cetera.
Any union organizer, whether it's grassroots or traditional organizer, you want to fly under the radar till you get the support.
That's right.
And unfortunately, they will say things that aren't true. They'll say things like, hey, this is just to get a vote. This is for more information. Hey, sign our sign-in sheet so you can get free whatever.
Oh,
pizza.
so the sign-in sheet is the...
Hey, you want free pizza for a meeting?
They just got a donut is all. They don't even want the unit. They only wanted a donut. Right. They didn't really want the unit.
No.
So, yeah.
If an employee reads it carefully, they'll know what it is. But
And you've been through a lot of campaigns. And would you say it's not uncommon at the end of a campaign for some of the employees who initially signed to vote no? In other words, a union might come in with 75 or out of 100 signatures, but still lose the election because they signed based on misinformation.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. One is they may have signed a card, they didn't know what it was, they didn't know what it meant, right? Maybe they felt tricked or misled or whatever. Or, one of the things that employers not always, but should make sure it's clearly communicated is it's a secret ballot. No one's going to know how you vote. Just because you thought you wanted the union when you heard one side of the story, now you've heard both sides of the story, so you can go into that secret, ballot and cast your vote any way you want. No one's going to know. And just one last legal point, if I could just add to it, right? So if you think about it, maybe you remember the game show Press Your Luck. Right?
Oh, I do.
No whammies, no whammies.
No whammies, I was going to say, no whammies,
Stop.
right? Yeah.
And the sort of the double whammy here from my perspective is, you're going to be restricted on when you can talk and how you can talk to your employees. If the union gets majority support, if you violate the law in any number of less significant ways, you may have the union forced on you. The double whammy is they're changing the law, right? We're going back to the old, not yet, it's not happened yet, but it will happen is my prediction. We're going to go back to that law where they're going to scrutinize employer policies, right? They're going to look at your handbook and they're going to say, you have a civility policy. Well, the reasonable employee might think that applies to my union talk.
Your policy says you can't threaten coworkers and
That's a violation of the law now. If you have union campaign,
Oh,
you haven't done your employee engagement, and now they get over half the support. And if they find any number of violations, the risk of having the union imposed is high, significant.
That's right. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I know many HR folks are pulling out those handbooks, Keith, and and I know it because you and I are getting phone calls almost every day asking us to review the handbook.
So we're going to go back to that old line
to the old. You really need to have a handbook that doesn't tell anybody they have to do anything.
Well, right. I mean, again, that's a different discussion. But
writing that balance, you
got to balance your legitimate business reasons for the policy and the impact on rights, and you got to assess your level of risk tolerance. Sure.
Well, this has been really an interesting and great discussion. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And for our listeners, Keith is absolutely the expert in this area. He's helped many, many companies develop their union avoidance strategies, their employee engagement plans, and also has handled lots and lots of elections. So we are lucky to have him. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks for letting me talk about labor law.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.